I never imagined that a simple trip to the store for a coffee maker would change the course of my life. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and ordinary. I had planned to pick up a replacement coffee machine. My old reliable one had sputtered its last breath the night before. Retirement, it seems, applied to appliances too. I wasn't feeling particularly sociable that day. My hair was pulled into a loose bun, I wore my favorite oversized cardigan, and I carried the air of someone who'd long since stopped trying to impress anyone. At 60, I had grown comfortable with solitude. My children were grown. My marriage had dissolved 15 years ago, and after a few half-hearted attempts at dating, I had quietly stepped back from that world. My home had become my sanctuary, and sometimes my cage. Still, I had my little comforts: books, music, late-night movies, and certain private things that made the loneliness more bearable. Things I didn't expect anyone else to see, but life has a way of catching us off guard. That morning, I wandered into a small, independent appliance store downtown. I liked avoiding the crowded box chains, and the shop had charm. Rows of shiny kettles, espresso machines, and toasters lined the walls. That's where I met Jake. He was behind the counter, rearranging a display. Tall, lean, with an easy smile and eyes that sparkled even under fluorescent lighting. He looked no older than 23, maybe younger. There was an earnestness about him, something refreshing in a world that often felt filtered and scripted. "Need help finding something?" he asked, stepping toward me. "I'm just here for a coffee maker," I replied, waving vaguely at the shelves. He grinned. "You've come to the right place. What kind of coffee do you like?" We talked for a few minutes, though it felt longer. Jake was charming, not in a rehearsed kind of way, but naturally warm. He recommended a sleek model, showing me how it worked with the patience of someone who actually enjoyed helping people. I probably could have figured it out myself, but I let him walk me through it. He offered to carry it to my car, and when I told him I lived just a few blocks away, he surprised me again. "Honestly, I'm on break. If you'd like, I could help set it up too." I blinked. "You want to come to my house and set up a coffee machine?" He laughed. "Only if you don't think that's weird." It was a little weird, but also not unwelcome. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Jake, come on." We walked in comfortable silence, the box in his arms, and my thoughts trailing behind us. I didn't know what I was doing. Letting a stranger, young enough to be my son, into my home? Maybe I was just tired of being alone. Or maybe Jake's energy had stirred something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. When we got to the door, I opened it without thinking about the living room. I should have thought about the living room. As Jake stepped inside, his eyes scanned the space. My comfortable old couch, the throw blanket half off the armrest, and there, in plain sight, were the things I had left out the night before. Items I normally kept tucked away. Items that spoke to a different side of me. A side I didn't show the outside world. My face flushed instantly. Jake's gaze paused for just a second. "You live alone, don't you?" he asked, a glint of curiosity in his voice. I nodded hastily, trying to find the words. "Let's just pretend you didn't see that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled gently. "Don't worry, it's not a big deal." "Feels like one to me," I muttered. Jake placed the box on the kitchen counter and turned to face me. "I mean it," he said. "We all have things that help us cope. You don't need to be embarrassed." I looked at him then, really looked. There was no judgment in his face, just kindness, and something else. A quiet understanding. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the tension. "Well, this is officially the most awkward coffee maker installation in history." Jake grinned. "I've had worse." We moved to the kitchen, and Jake began unpacking the machine. I offered him a glass of water and leaned against the doorway, watching him work. His hands moved with confidence, and he explained each step like a teacher. I found myself smiling more than I expected. "So, Jake," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "do you do this often? Rescue women with broken coffee makers?" He laughed. "Only the interesting ones." I raised an eyebrow. Flatterer. Just honest, he replied, glancing at me with that same boyish warmth. As the machine hissed to life for its first brew, the kitchen was filled with the rich, comforting scent of fresh coffee. Jake poured 2 cups and handed me one. To unexpected meetings, he said, raising his mug. To coffee, I replied, clinking mine gently against his. We sipped in silence for a moment. The tension had eased, replaced by something calmer. Jake looked around the kitchen, then back at me. You know, he said, I really like your place. It feels lived in, not in a bad way, just real. I smiled. That's a nice way of saying it's a little cluttered. No, he said sincerely. It's warm. It feels like someone actually lives here. I didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments from someone so much younger felt strange, but also undeniably sweet. Jake glanced at the clock. I should probably get back soon. But thank you for letting me help. Thank you for helping, I said quietly. You didn't have to. He shrugged. Maybe I wanted to. He moved toward the door, then paused. Brittany? Yes? I hope this doesn't sound forward, but would it be okay if I stopped by again sometime? Not to fix anything, just to say hi. I blinked. Sure. That would be nice. Jake smiled. Great. Maybe next time you can tell me more about your favorite coffee. And with that, he was gone. As the door closed behind him, I stood in the quiet of my home, coffee mug still warm in my hands. I had no idea what had just happened, but I knew something had shifted. In the quiet that followed, I looked around the room. The couch, the table, the little things that had seemed so ordinary that morning. Now, they felt touched by something new. Jake had walked in like a breeze through an open window, and suddenly everything felt just a little bit different. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wouldn't be alone anymore.
I didn't sleep much that night. After Jake left, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping the last bit of my coffee as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet I was used to. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't hollow. It was thoughtful. There was an echo of his voice still in the air. His smile, that spark in his eyes, the warm tone he used when he said my name. It all lingered with me like a scent clinging to fabric. I replayed the visit over and over, trying to understand why it had affected me so deeply. Maybe it was because Jake didn't look at me the way others did. He didn't see a 60-year-old divorcee with a predictable routine and a house full of memories. He saw me, or at least he looked like he wanted to. And maybe that's what scared me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I cleaned the living room first, folded the throw blanket, tucked away the personal items I'd accidentally left out, gave the carpet a good vacuum. I even rearranged a few things on the bookshelf, as if some subtle interior changes could help me make sense of the emotional ones. Around noon, I thought about texting the store. I still had the little receipt with the phone number printed at the bottom. My thumb hovered over my phone screen, but I didn't press send. Instead, I made more coffee. I was just pouring my second cup when the doorbell rang. I stared at the door, heart skipping a beat. No one ever came by unannounced. I couldn't remember the last time someone had. When I opened the door, there he was, Jake, standing on my porch like he'd always belonged there. He held a small paper bag in one hand and lifted it slightly. I brought muffins. I blinked at him, then smiled. That's dangerously charming of you. He laughed. I figured we didn't get to enjoy our coffee properly yesterday. Thought I'd try again. I stepped aside without hesitation. Come in. Jake walked in, his eyes sweeping the room quickly, perhaps noticing the tidier state of the living room, though he didn't say anything. He placed the bag on the kitchen counter and pulled out 2 blueberry muffins. I hope you're not allergic to anything, he said, unwrapping one. Only to boredom, I replied, taking a bite and smiling. These are perfect. We sat at the table again, just like the day before, but this time it felt intentional. Like we were both trying to figure out what this was. this strange magnetic thread that had pulled us together. "So," I said, sipping my coffee, "do you always make house calls with baked goods?" Jake chuckled. "Only when I want to impress someone." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "And how's that working out for you?" He grinned. "I'll let you be the judge." There was a pause. A warmth settled between us. "Yesterday," he said more seriously now, "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. With what I saw. And what I said." I looked at him carefully. "You didn't. Well, maybe a little. But not in the way you think. It's just been a long time since someone looked at that part of me and didn't flinch." Jake nodded slowly. "You seemed strong, in control, but also kind of lonely." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I traced the rim of my mug with one finger. "You're not wrong," I said finally. "I am lonely sometimes, but I've made peace with it. Or I thought I had." He tilted his head. "Do you mind me asking, why did you let me in yesterday? I mean, really?" I met his gaze. "Because something about you felt safe and honest. And maybe because I've been waiting for someone to knock on that door for a very long time." Jake looked down for a moment, then back up at me. "I'm glad you did." We talked for hours that afternoon, about everything and nothing. Jake told me about his family, his mother who raised him alone, his younger sister who just started college, his part-time job at the store while he figured out what he wanted to do next. He wanted to study architecture but hadn't applied to any programs yet. "I keep telling myself I'll do it next year," he said. "But I don't know. I get scared I'll fail." "You're young," I said. "You're supposed to be unsure." "But you seem so sure," he replied, "like you figured life out." I laughed softly. "Honey, I'm still figuring it out. I've just had more time to make peace with the fact that I never will." There was silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. We were both turning over the weight of our words. Jake stood up and wandered into the living room. His eyes fell on a photograph on the mantel, an old picture of me and my ex-husband on our wedding day. "You looked happy," he said quietly. "We were," I replied. "For a while." He looked over at me. "Do you still talk to him?" "No," I said. Our paths split cleanly. We were different people by the end. It hurt, but it also gave me space to rediscover who I was. He nodded, then sat back down beside me. "You're very easy to talk to," he said. "You're very easy to listen to," I replied. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment the air in the room felt charged again. Not rushed, not heavy, just aware. "I should go," he said, standing up reluctantly. "I have a shift soon." I walked him to the door, unsure of what to say, but he turned before I could speak. "Would it be okay if I came by again?" he asked. I smiled. "Only if you bring muffins." He laughed. "Deal." And then he was gone again. This time the quiet felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was anticipation. That night, I sat by the window, watching the sky turn a soft shade of blue as twilight crept in. I thought about Jake, about his kindness, his youth, his curiosity. I thought about how unexpected it all felt, and how alive I suddenly felt because of it. Maybe it was just the thrill of attention. Maybe it was something deeper. I didn't know yet, but I knew I wanted to find out.
It's strange how someone can start to feel like part of your world so quickly. Jake had been dropping by more often, sometimes just for 10 minutes to share a laugh or bring over a new muffin flavor he'd discovered. Other days, he stayed longer. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just shared space, me reading on the couch, him sketching in a little spiral notebook he carried around. It was easy, comforting. But underneath it, I could feel something else building. A quiet tension. A stirring. One afternoon, he texted me. "Got off early. Want some company? I'll bring snacks." When he arrived, he had a paper bag in one hand and his usual grin. "You like shortbread?" "I love shortbread," I said, stepping aside to let him in. But you're going to ruin my dinner. Worth it, he said, heading straight for the kitchen. You always feed my spirit, I'll feed your sweet tooth. I rolled my eyes, but smiled. He had that effect on me, made me feel lighter just by walking through the door. We sat at the dining table, splitting the buttery cookies, sipping tea, and talking about everything from childhood memories to the songs we couldn't stop playing on repeat. So, what did you want to be when you were my age? He asked. I paused. Honestly, I wanted to be a travel writer. I used to imagine myself on trains through Europe or walking through rainforests with a notebook in hand. Why didn't you? Life, I said. Marriage, kids, responsibilities. I don't regret it, but sometimes I wonder. Jake's expression softened. I think you still could. I laughed. What, write guidebooks for women over 60 who never leave the house? Exactly, he said, eyes twinkling. There's a whole audience out there waiting for that. I leaned back in my chair, watching him. His optimism was contagious. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. Later, we moved to the living room. The sun had begun to dip, and the golden light spilled across the carpet, casting long, warm shadows. Jake sat on the edge of the couch, tapping the armrest rhythmically while I curled up with my legs beneath me. What are you always sketching in that notebook? I asked, teasing. He pulled it out and handed it to me. Take a look. I flipped through pages filled with quick pencil drawings, buildings, street corners, little architectural details, and then, near the middle, I froze. There was a sketch of my living room, the bookshelf, the window, even the cat figurine on the mantel. You drew this? I asked softly. He nodded. After the first time I came over, I don't know, your space just stuck with me. I looked up at him, something catching in my chest. You really saw it. I saw you, he said, his voice quieter now. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick with something unspoken, curiosity, longing, nerves. I didn't move, and neither did he. Then, slowly, Jake leaned in. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't bold. It was cautious, gentle, as if he was asking for permission without using words. I met him halfway. Our lips touched, brief, soft, and warm. It wasn't a kiss that demanded anything. It was a whisper, a question, a beginning. When we pulled back, we both let out a small breath at the same time. Jake's eyes searched mine. Sorry, Don't be, I said quickly, my voice steady. I wanted that. He smiled, shy and grateful. I wasn't sure. I wasn't either, I admitted. But now I am. We didn't kiss again. We didn't need to. That one moment had said enough for now. A few minutes later, we sat side by side, legs nearly touching, sharing the silence. I should probably head out soon, Jake said, glancing at the time. Okay, I replied, my voice softer now. He stood and walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Will I see you tomorrow? I nodded. You just might. He stepped out into the evening light, and I closed the door gently behind him. My hand came to rest on the wood, fingertips tracing its grain. I felt the echo of the kiss still lingering on my lips. Not rushed, not planned, just real and beautiful. I sat back on the couch, exhaling slowly, letting the quiet fill the room again. But this quiet was different. It was no longer empty. It was full of something I hadn't dared to hope for. Possibility. The night didn't begin with fireworks or grand declarations. It began with a quiet knock on the door. I remember the clock had just passed 9. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a teacup when I heard it. I dried my hands slowly, unsure if I had imagined the sound. But the knock came again, soft, rhythmic, familiar. When I opened the door, Jake stood under the porch light, his jacket damp from a light drizzle, hair slightly tousled, eyes searching mine. I'm sorry to drop by so late, he said, his voice carrying a gentleness that made my chest tighten. You're always welcome, I replied, stepping aside. Come in. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't in a rush to explain why he was there. And I didn't ask. I didn't need to. We sat on the couch, our usual spot, only this time the air felt warmer somehow. Charged, not just with emotion, but with understanding. We had crossed a threshold earlier that week with that single quiet kiss. Tonight felt like the continuation of a sentence we had barely begun. We didn't talk much, just a few words here and there. I couldn't stop thinking about you, he said, barely above a whisper. And I, with a smile both nervous and sure, replied, I know. I couldn't either. There was no dramatic music, no sweeping cinematic moment, just two people, drawn together across time and difference, leaning into something real. We held each other for a long time, and then somewhere between the silence and the closeness, our lips met again, and this time, we didn't pull away. What followed was not a confession, not an indulgence. It was a quiet surrender to connection, to trust, to the ache of loneliness that had finally found its match. We danced around words that didn't need to be spoken. We let our hands say what our mouths couldn't. We moved through the room like we had known each other in another life, gently, tenderly, and with an unspoken reverence. And when dawn came, filtering soft light through the window blinds, we were still there, wrapped in blankets, wrapped in each other. Jake's arm rested under my shoulder, his breath even and deep. I hadn't slept much, but I didn't feel tired. I felt grounded, present. I lay still, watching the sunlight stretch across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in years, I felt safe in someone else's stillness. Eventually, he stirred. Morning, he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. Morning, I whispered back. His eyes opened slowly, and when they met mine, there was no awkwardness, no regret, just calm. He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear. I didn't mean to fall asleep, he said. I'm glad you did, I replied. We lay there a little longer, neither of us eager to break the moment. Finally, I sat up and reached for the robe draped over the chair by the bed. I'll make coffee, I said, standing and stretching. Jake watched me, his expression soft. Let me help. In the kitchen, we moved in harmony. I filled the kettle. He measured the grounds. I reached for the mugs. He opened the blinds. It felt natural, like we'd done it 100 times before. As we sat at the table, sipping from mismatched mugs, I could feel the weight of the night beginning to settle into something more solid. Jake placed his cup down and looked at me seriously. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did last night change anything for you? I paused, thinking carefully, then nodded. Yes, it did. His brow furrowed slightly, and I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. It changed how I feel about being alone, I said, and how I feel about being seen. Jake exhaled, relief washing over his face. Me too. We sat quietly again, the kind of quiet that only comes when two people have finally said what matters. Later that morning, we went for a walk. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of rain. The neighborhood looked different with him beside me, brighter, more detailed, like I was seeing it through his eyes. Jake slipped his hand into mine and I didn't pull away. I used to think I was supposed to be with someone my age, he said, not looking at me. That anything else would be complicated. But being with you doesn't feel complicated. I chuckled softly. That's because we haven't told anyone yet. He laughed. True. But even if it gets complicated, I'd rather have this than go back to feeling disconnected. I squeezed his hand. Me too. We passed a small park, and Jake pulled me toward a bench near the playground. We sat, watching a couple of kids chase each other through the grass while their parents sipped coffee and chatted nearby. Do you ever miss it? He asked. That stage of life? Sometimes, I admitted, but not as much as I thought I would. I think I've grown into who I was always meant to be. He looked at me with something like admiration. "You're incredible, you know." I laughed. "I'm just older." "No," he said. "You're more. You've lived. You've loved. And you're still open. That's rare." I didn't know what to say to that, so I leaned against him instead. We sat until the early afternoon, talking about everything and nothing. When we returned to my house, I made sandwiches, and we ate them on the porch, legs stretched out, sunshine warming our skin. It felt like something out of a memory I hadn't lived yet. As the day wore on, I could feel reality slowly creeping back in. Jake had responsibilities, a shift at the store, an apartment on the other side of town, a life to return to. "I should go," he said, standing reluctantly. I nodded. "I know." He lingered at the door. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" he asked. I smiled. "You don't have to ask." He leaned in and kissed my cheek, soft, warm, lingering. Then he stepped back and walked to his car. I watched him go, my heart both full and aching. When the door closed behind me, the quiet returned. But this time it wasn't unwelcome. It was reflective, gentle, like an exhale after a long-held breath. I sat in the living room, the couch still carrying the memory of where he had been. I ran my hand across the cushion, smiling to myself. What we had wasn't conventional, but it was real. And more than that, it was ours. Over the next few weeks, Jake became part of my everyday life. He'd stop by after work with groceries or new music to share. I'd surprise him with baked goods or small gifts, books I thought he'd like, a sketch pad, a ridiculous mug that said, "Certified Coffee Technician." We had our routines, our quiet mornings, our long walks, our soft evenings curled up on the couch. And yes, there were more nights like the first. Nights where we didn't need to speak, where the silence between us was filled with trust, affection, and something deeper. But we never rushed. We didn't make grand plans. We didn't label what we were doing. We just let it be what it was. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn pink and purple, Jake turned to me. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked. I nodded. "Of course, don't you?" "I do," he said. "And lately, you're in it." That simple sentence hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, heart suddenly full. I used to think my story was winding down, I admitted, that the most exciting chapters were behind me. But now, I'm starting to think there's still more to write. Jake reached over and took my hand. "Then let's keep writing it together," he said. And I knew, in that moment, that I wasn't just a footnote in his life. I was a chapter, maybe even a turning point. That night, after he left, I sat down at my desk and opened a fresh journal. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Sometimes life gives you a second chance, not because you missed the first one, but because you deserve another." I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew this. I was no longer afraid to feel, to hope, to love again. And whether our story would last a season or a lifetime, I was grateful for every word of it. Because Jake hadn't just fixed a coffee maker. He'd helped me rediscover the warmth I thought I'd lost, and in return, I gave him something he didn't even know he was missing. A place to belong. So, if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for being open. And if you've ever felt like your story was winding down, let me tell you something. You're not done yet. There's always another chapter. You just have to be willing to turn the page. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss it. Hit that follow button, turn on notifications, and don't forget to drop a comment about this story. I can't wait to hear what you think. So, let's chat in the comments. Your support means the world to me.